Welcome to Universal Man. My name is Mark Kweppett and I'm here to help you sharpen your masculine edge. And in today's video, I'm going to be talking to you about the flex and the flow state. I believe the flex and the flow state, they represent kind of two sides of this masculine coin of expression. The flex state is a more aggressive and assertive mode of action, and then the flow state is more open, playful, and creative. And I believe that both of these are necessary if you really want to achieve your highest expression of masculinity. So welcome back to the Universal Man Thought Vlog, where I pretty much share with you guys my thoughts on things. And today, it's going to be pretty much a meditation on masculinity. My understanding and ideals around, what it means to be, the best man possible are constantly evolving and changing. And, I figured I'd take this chance to kind of update you with some cool stuff that I found that I think has, it definitely has really helped me out a lot to be the man that I want to be. So, I figure why not share that with all of you. So in this video, what I want to do is explore these two different and distinct headspaces that I've got here, these two different mindsets. And I think both of these are essentially masculine dominant mindsets, but they have, they're very different and they're used for different things. They have different intentions, different sets of goals, and, different uses really. So I want to outline them for you. So a quick note before we start, I use this term flow state. Some of you may have heard that term before in association with kind of like this state of being in the zone or like being like super absorbed in the moment and kind of losing yourself. That's a popular concept that's out there. That's related to what I'm talking about, but if you're familiar with that concept, just kind of set it aside and look at my flow state as kind of a separate thing. The stance that I'm going to be taking is that these two different states are more kind of archetypal configurations. They are, energies that you can voluntarily switch between and channel at will, rather than just sort of this phenomena that your brain, experiences when a certain set of conditions are met. So let's start by looking at this flex state, all right? And the flex state, in archetypal terms, is your warrior energy. And if we're going to look at, say, James Bond, all right? This is James Bond when he's being a soldier, when he's being a fighter, when he's, actually hand-to-hand combat, shooting enemies, that kind of stuff. This flex state, then, it represents a very aggressive and assertive state. I think, neurochemically, it involves a lot of vasopressin, maybe even some adrenaline and that sort of thing. And really, the core purpose of this flex energy is to establish order and control. When you use this kind of energy successfully, it gives you an ability to establish like discipline and influence in certain situations where, force is necessary. And so examples of places where you might be in this flex state would be if you are in an actual fight with someone, if you are, really rejecting or pushing away some kind of limiting belief or self-deception, if you are forcing yourself to overcome apathy, laziness, whatever, if you're pushing through some kind of pain, instead of just like shirking away, or if you're just basically enforcing personal discipline. These are all scenarios where you need to use this flexing warrior energy where your willpower is kind of contracted at max. And the way in which you enter into this state, from what I can tell, is that you have to attach yourself firmly to an outcome. You have to decide that, all right, this is what I want to have happen, and I'm willing to sacrifice X amount to make that happen. And you're willing to fight to that extreme. And so, the ultimate warrior state is one of life and death, where you're willing to literally sacrifice your life for a specific outcome that you're attached to. Doesn't always need to be that dramatic, but it's still the same kind of dynamic. It's like, I'm willing to invest this much and I'm going to fight to this point to get the outcome that I desire. And the end result is that there is a kind of compression around the flex state. There's a contraction, and it's kind of like your most concentrated and powerful form. You can accomplish a lot here, but there is some drawbacks. This kind of concentration, it's energetically quite taxing, and if you can't perpetually maintain this state, this is why people say that you've got a very finite amount of willpower, because this is a resource intensive state. But not only that, it seems like the perception of the experience, when you're really flexed, time slows down. All right. It's like, if you've ever been in a moment where something really intense was happening and it seemed like things were moving in slow motion, that's this compression of the flex state. Or, something that probably most people can relate to is if you're trying to do something and you're in a lot of pain, you got to push through a lot of pain, that thing can seem to last forever, right? It seems like time slows down. So, that's just kind of a side effect or characteristic that I've, seen with this sort of activity. So now let's look at the flow state. In archetypal terms, this flow state, it kind of is the lover archetype. If you're going to look at the four masculine archetypes, it's like we got the warrior over here and the lover, or this flow, kind of softer, more open sort of thing over here. And this would be James Bond when he's, smooth talking some lady over drinks. Okay, he's still very masculine, but it's an entirely different energy than when he's fighting off enemies or something like that. So, this flow state, it's more receptive and responsive. It's kind of like I said, this playful, open state where I think neurochemically there's significantly more maybe oxytocin and endorphin sort of involved. And this is super useful for creativity and cultivation. Because it's way less intense than the flex state, it's often way less taxing on you and can even be quite restorative. So I would say that you're in a flow state here when you are engaging in exploratory thought, when you're joking around, when you're flirting, maybe when you are, really kind of just losing yourself in a sensual experience, like, enjoying some, fine food or wine, or even immersing yourself in sex, that sort of thing. Like these kinds of sensual experiences where you just savor them and you play with them and you enjoy them. This is what I would consider this flow state energy. So how do you enter into this flow state? Well, I think kind of the simplest way for me to describe it is that you play a game. And I would say playing a game is very different from this flex state where you're very attached to an outcome. The whole idea behind a game is that, win or lose, it doesn't really matter so much. It's, you do it for the experience. And so the flex state is built on this concept of sort of detached involvement, where you have an intention and you're engaged, but you're kind of open to evolution. You're open to different things that go on. And because of that, you can be more responsive. And so different situations, they require you to play different kinds of games to enter into a, flow state. Some games are very simple, like, taking a nap or, enjoying a meal. It's pretty much just focus on, the physical sensations that feel good and ignore the other stuff. And you'll be able to, enter into a nice flow state with that. But some games are more complex, like social games, like learning how to, joke around, social banter, flirting. That kind of stuff is a different kind of game that some people learn how to play and they play quite well. Some people never do. And I think a reason why a lot of people struggle learning how to enter into a flow with these sorts of things is that they overthink them. They end up playing multiple games at once, which your brain's not super good at. Like, they'll be focused on showing up while also analyzing. And you can't really do that super well. You can't, and this is how you give yourself social anxiety, is that, you try to show up one way and you're playing that game, but then you're also monitoring yourself and like analyzing, like, oh no, I screwed up here, I shouldn't say that, or they're probably thinking this, blah, blah, blah. And then you kind of overwhelm yourself and you get, kicked out of the moment and you don't show up so great. So the key is to play one game at a time, separate them out. If you want to reflect later, just be in the moment when you're in the moment. And so the kind of end result of being in this flow state, instead of this concentrated, constricted reality that the flex state creates, this is the opposite. There's kind of this expansion, and time seems to pass more rapidly. I mean, we've all had this where we're having fun and time passes super quickly. And this is where you want to be, obviously, if you want to get stuff done. If you have a big task in front of you, if you can get into this playful, flow state where you're just kind of moving and, living and in the experience, well, that's the best way to make a lot of progress. Otherwise, you're going to be trapped in the eternity of the flex state, right? Now, one of the things that I've seen with a lot of people is that they have, they favor one of these energies over the other, and they struggle because of it. So, let's look at the situation first of having too much flow but not enough flex. All right, if you have too much flow and not enough flex, then basically you're kind of weak and amorphous. And you can think of it, it's like you become too much like water. And water always follows the path of least resistance. And there's, good time. There's times where that is good. But there are also times where that is very unhelpful, just following the path of least resistance, especially when you've contracted some kind of disordered emotional state. So for example, a porn addiction, right? The path of least resistance would be to just, be apathetic and blah around it and just let it kind of control you. Or, if you have circumstances that make, your ideal path a little difficult, well, if you don't have any flex there, well, you're just going to kind of be a victim to that resistance. So the end result of not having enough flex in your life is usually kind of, lack of discipline and lack of achievement. Now, on the flip side, you got too much flex and not enough flow. Well, this would be someone who's very stiff and rigid. This would be someone who's kind of perfectionistic, very hard on themselves, and they're constantly stressed all the time. And these kinds of people, they also tend to struggle in moments of improvisation and spontaneity and creativity, because they're like those kinds of activities, if you try to approach them from that, flexed out state, they seem so hard and they take so long and they just drain the heck out of you. And it's, terrible. And, the people who live like this, they often end up depleting themselves, and they fall into a very similar low energy state that the people who don't have any flex find themselves in. And ironically, porn addiction and escapism and all that kind of stuff, that can be used as a way to cope with either one of these imbalances, because, it'll, for that overly tight and rigid person, it gives them a way to relax. And for that undisciplined person, it gives them a way to forget. So the key then is we want to have balance. We want to have both of these. And you can think of it as like your flex energy, that's like your military internally. It creates a secure border, and it maintains like order internally. Okay, this is what you use for discipline. It's kind of like your skeletal structure that gives you shape and form, that can be healthy and good. But then your flow state, that's, the smooth moving parts. That's where the creativity, the vitality, the inspiration, and the general enjoyment of life comes from. It's only when you have both of these forces at play that you can really become a fertile and universal man. And that's what the goal is here. You want to be able to do it all. You want to be able to fight for the things that need to be fought for, but you also want to be able to play with and cultivate, good and new things. And this isn't new stuff. I mean, most of the masculine archetypes out there, they combine these forces. That's why I use James Bond, because he's a good example of kind of an integration of these forces. He's got kind of this, smooth, suave flow, but then he's got like this very aggressive, competent, flex. Another example kind of similar to that would be like, the Marvel's Iron Man, the Tony Stark, what's his name? Robert Downey Jr. He does a great example of, being like, okay, this badass who can get things done, but he's also, a very, wisecracking, smooth dude. And then there's some archetypes that are very much less integrated. You could think of Batman as like, all right, Bruce Wayne is all flow, Batman is all flex. But if you really start looking at these things, you'll see them show up very intensely. And I would say the typical hero's journey is usually the journey of integrating these things. And there's one more thing I want to hit on for this topic, and it's that I found that it's possible to have both of these energies, both flex and flow, but having them in the wrong spot. So like, you can sometimes be trying to flex when you should be flowing, and vice versa. So let me I'll give you some personal examples of where that's shown up for me. So if you're flexing where you should be flowing, that's you in most instances trying to control something that you cannot directly control. So this is something I had to deal with learning how to work for myself. Initially I didn't have enough flex, and so I really struggled to be disciplined. So I started to develop that, and it was great, and I started to be able to show up and all this kind of stuff. But then I took it too far, and I took it to my actual creative process, where I would be, working on a course or a video or whatever, and I'd be so tense, and I'd be trying to flex my way through it and just treat this task as an enemy that I was just trying to cross off my list. And the problem with that is, like I said, we condense our time, we condense our energy, and it's depleting. And so it's like, it felt like every moment felt like spent working felt like an hour. And it would leave me so drained that I just wasn't able to work very much because I just wore myself out with being so tense. And so what I have kind of learned how to do is to consciously use the flex energy to control the things which I can control, which is I can control that I sit down, I can control that I touch my keyboard, I open up my word processor, whatever. So I fight for that and fight through any resistance around that. But then once I'm there, it's time to play. It's time to experiment. It's time to be open, to be light, to enjoy doing the work that I love. So there's a lot to be said for learning how to switch between these two powers, voluntarily at the right moments. An example of the other side of the issue where, flowing and where you should be flexing, this for me showed up on a very internal level. There was a period in time where I was under the impression that you had to treat every emotion and thought that came up with kind of this very gentle respect. It's like, oh, I have to be so compassionate toward that feeling, or, oh, I have to be so understanding of this resistance or emotional whatever that's coming up for me. And this was a big problem for me because it essentially put me in a position of victimhood to my own toxic or disordered thoughts and emotions. I was trying to follow this, this general Buddhist sentiment at the time where, you just invite all your thoughts and emotions in as honored guests and just be mindful of them and present with them. And there is something to be said for that, for sure, because you got to understand what you're working with. You got to identify and clearly understand what's coming up. Definitely do that. But there's a point where you identify, oh crap, that's a criminal. I'm not going to have dinner with him. I'm not going to invite him into my house because he's going to steal all my shit and break everything. So it's like once you identify an internal thing as an enemy, as something that will make your life worse if you give it energy, power, time, whatever, then you got to treat it like an energy and you have to flex. And this was a big breakthrough for me, learning how to do that on the appropriate level internally. There's got to be a balance. You got to learn how to work with what's there and understand it and be open to it. But you also know when you got to shut it down because it's bad, and you got to treat it as bad. And that's an important line to really learn how to draw, especially if you're recovering from porn addiction, because a lot of times there's all different kinds of stuff coming up. Some of it you really got to look at and try and heal, and some of it you just got to throw out because it's garbage. So that's it, my little rambling meditation on masculinity for today. I hope you guys found it useful and interesting. As always, I really appreciate your feedback. I love hearing what you guys have to say. Any questions you have, any topics you want me to look at, or anything like that, please just leave it in the comments below. Please subscribe if you haven't, and stay sharp, and I'll see you in the next one.